Morning.
Yeah.
For anyone that doesn't know about this incident, it's probably one of the largest UFO cases anywhere in the world. And I will try to go into some detail today, but we are in fact pushed for time. So I will tell you what happened. The official story was that this was just a military exercise. Nothing could be further from the truth. And today, we will prove it. It's a strange turn of events that brings me here today. It was not my choice. I never dreamt I would be standing here in front of you. In fact, it was never my intention to ever speak publicly. On the 26th of February 2016, my life, my neighbours' lives, and their friends and family changed forever. What we witnessed, we can never unsee. And if this thing didn't come down behind my house, I wouldn't have seen it either. But I did. Since coming forward, I have been ridiculed, falsely accused, bullied and trolled on many occasions in some sort of smear campaign. I've been placed in a position where I've been forced to defend myself, and today will be no different. I've been accused of doing this for money, when nothing could be further from the truth. But there is a price, and the price has been to my life. Confidentiality is always, and still is, my #1 priority. I would never expose a witness or deliberately put them at risk. And every witness that has come forward to me can testify to this fact, some of whom are present here today. And I thank them for their bravery in coming forward and supporting this case. And even though they will not speak publicly, they will speak privately and have done so on many occasions. Today, I would like you to imagine that you're in a court of law, and that you, and everyone watching around the world today, are the judge and jury in this case. And I ask you to seek the truth in this matter, to set aside your personal beliefs, and to find the evidence that we will present today. We will prove the military knowingly and expectedly set an ambush for a huge interdimensional UFO, and without first attempting any communications, pursued and shot down one of the smaller craft it jettisoned, while continuing to pursue the others. The police closed the roads and the footpaths, whilst the military conducted a very loud and disturbing clean-up operation for the entire area in what the military calls silent hours, with both helicopters and troops on the ground, and this all within a residential area and next to a hospital. This started for me on the 23rd of February 2016, when I noticed two small grey twin propeller planes flying very low and very slow over my village. And we have RAF St Athan just down the road, so it wasn't really a big surprise to see a military aircraft. But they don't tend to stay. These are the aircraft involved, and these are their radar returns. Snake 48 and this Army Corps Jackal 1 took it in turns to circle PENTYRCH all day and all night for 3 days and 3 nights. The Wednesday morning was really when we started to notice the behaviour of these aircraft. And one of my neighbours, David, had come out of his house and he was cursing because this small aircraft had kept him awake all night. And so we watched, and it wasn't long before the second aircraft, almost identical to the first, turned up to take his place. And Wednesday night, that was all I could hear. Every 15 minutes, this small grey twin prop plane flying over my house. And when someone's pointed a sound out to you, that's all you can hear. And you kind of sit there and anticipate when it's going to come back. So Wednesday night, I had a very restless night. Going into Thursday, David had contacted Wells Online. Hi, please can you find out why the RAF have been constantly flying over our houses for the last 9 hours, CF159QA, PENTYRCH in Cardiff. It's getting loud now and very annoying. It's like a big aircraft carrier. Sounds very loud. Thanks. They didn't respond. The Ministry of Defence was emailed. They too did not respond. So we decided amongst ourselves and my other neighbours that clearly they were watching for something. So we decided that if they were still there later, we would stay out and watch with them. We clearly didn't expect to see what we saw. David suggested that perhaps they were watching for Russian planes. And I know that sounds outrageous, but it was only the week before that our RAF had turned away 2 Russian Tu-160 bombers from our airspace. So I think he thought it was going to be some kind of real-life dogfight. Going into Thursday night, we stood in my garden, lit the fire pit, and watched this small grey plane, by now starting to fly in figure 8 patterns. And got to about 2 a.m. in the early hours of Friday, 26th of February. And I was just about to go in, I was freezing cold, and I said to Dave, look, I'm tired, it's late, nothing's happening. When I heard what sounded like a missile coming, and it was this. Okay, sorry. Have some water. This is the E3 Sentry plane, a NATO plane, above PENTYRCH in South Wales. Excuse me one second. So because this plane had turned up, we decided we'd stay a little longer. It started to circle, not small circles. We estimated it took about 5 minutes to go around once. Now PENTYRCH is in an elevated position, and you can see in every direction but north, because that's where the actual mountain is. David said perhaps it's taxiing for the airport. Cardiff International Airport, where you wouldn't expect to see a NATO plane. No, it doesn't go up any higher. I'll bring it closer to my face. Is that better? Sorry, guys. After the 7th time it went around, one red light became visible high above the trees behind my house. And I called for Donna, one of my other neighbours who'd been watching with us that night. She'd gone out gone into the home to make us all hot drinks. Didn't get an answer. Called a second time, still no answer. So David and I ran to the 5-bar gate that overlooks the farmland behind my house to get an unobstructed view as to what was going on. And one red light turned into 3 lights. Didn't split. It came in side on. We're talking about the very pinnacle of a huge pyramid UFO. This is the true likeness to what was seen that night. It came in side on, turning very slowly anti-clockwise, and as it did so, came down in a pendulum motion and jettisoned a really bright green object out of the top, like it had been fired out of a cannon. This green object moved across to my left-hand side and above the treetops, and just rocked there gently, backwards and forwards. I can't tell you what shape it was. It was brighter than the moonlight, and actually hurt my eyes to look at it. The pyramid listed to the right-hand side, still turning very slowly anti-clockwise, and tilted to the right, and moving away from us. And I stood on the 5-bar gate to get a better look through the bare trees, and said to David, it's landing, thinking it was coming down, when in reality, the field rises there and is the foot of the Garth Mountain. When it neared the ground, it ejected, I described, as a hand of lightning that came out of this craft. But not thin lightning like we have here, it was thick, fire-coloured, like a fingers, like a hand of lightning. And the whole thing lit up really brightly, so you could see around the brightest lights that this was a solid craft, and not just a string of lights. David said, whilst I was looking at the bottom, and I don't know to this day why I was fixated on it touching the ground, but I was. He said he saw 15 or 20 he described as orbs just come out the top of this thing. And they seemed to dance and mingle with each other. And I didn't see any of those because I was fixated on it touching the ground. And such was the size of it from 200 metres away that whilst I looked at the bottom, you couldn't see the top. That's how big. I was still standing on the gate and I heard the military planes coming. The E-3 Sentry is still above us. And I looked up to see these two that I now know to be C-17 aircraft, American planes, flying wingtip to wingtip. And when I looked back, I couldn't see the pyramid anymore. That's not to say it wasn't there, I just couldn't see it. I still stood on the gate. I watched these two aircraft. Two further aircraft came from the RAF, two big Hercules aircraft. And suddenly you had four aircraft, the two C-17s in the middle, the two C-130s out wide. And the green object that shot, they were going towards where the pyramid was last seen. And the green object, the first object that came out, shot across and in front of these four aircraft and flashed three really bright strobes at them and seemed to get excited. Like it skipped and bobbed, like I described, like Tigger off Winnie the Pooh, away into the distance, and it bathed all these aircraft in green light. It was quite surreal. The E-3 Sentry was still above us. When they had gone out of sight, we were approached by two barrel-shaped objects. These things were completely silent, about the size of a small car. They were completely smooth on the outside. I want to say like they were made of glass, but I don't know because I didn't touch them. But one of them moved across to my left-hand side and stopped above the hedge, about 20 to 30 feet away from us. And I just stared at it just for a few seconds because I wanted the details. I wanted to see. I could see all the insides moving like white noise on a TV screen, but it was more 3D than that. Like it was mixing inside. And then I looked to see where the other one was, and that hadn't stopped. And I was still stood on the gate, and by this time, it was right over the top of me. This close. And it changed colour from red to green. And I felt it scan me. Like I was lifted from the inside, this elation, these things were not hostile. Not hostile. And I did hear a man's voice tell the world what you witnessed here. And I said I will. And these two objects moved off in different directions. The red object that was above the hedge moved away to my left, and it had remained sentry the whole time. And the green object moved away to my right-hand side and above the rooftops of the houses. And David and I had walked down to the second, what we call the second field, where this pyramid had come in, because he said he saw 15 or 20 of these things, to see if there were any more. It was so wet and slippery underfoot, in the middle of a mountain, in the middle of the night. There was nothing we could see. Our phones didn't work. That was the other thing. Nothing electronic worked. We think it had something to do with the E-3 Sentry, but equally it could have had something to do with the extremely high EMF that was emitted from these craft. Gary will get into that afterwards. We went back to my house, and David and I were polar opposites. He sat there staring into the abyss, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. And I was energised. I needed to tell someone, anyone, that would know what to do with this information, because I was not and am not a ufologist, then or even now. The following morning, Wales Online put out a cover story, how military planes and helicopters had kept parts of South Wales awake in some kind of exercise. Well, I didn't know you weren't supposed to talk about UFOs, so I launched into a comment. Thanks for sharing, but I can categorically state that this was no exercise. Last night I saw absolutely everything, and what they were chasing were not planes. I will take a lie detector anywhere for anyone. But what I witnessed last night will stay with me for the rest of my life. What is more, the military knew they were coming and had a spotter plane in the air for 2 days waiting for the event. And when it came, 4 planes chased the green object, whilst the spotter plane circled approximately 6 red oval objects which formed a pyramid shape.
Several red spheres hovered silently above the fields until the helicopters came. And I did have two debunkers. One of them called themselves the Smoking Man, using a fake Facebook profile. And the other one called himself Agent Fox Mulder, because they like no play on words. Genuinely. Excuse me. Well, I wanted to know what had happened to the green object. Because whilst I tossed and turned in my bed, I heard a huge explosion from the direction of Llantrisant. So, Llantrisant, because of the comments made by other people, is my starting point at the other end, because I wanted to find the impact crater. What went off on Llantrisant Common at 4 a.m? Helicopters landed for ages, then took off again, circled round for ages. I heard them too. It was two explosions, some sort of military exercise. As there was a Chinook, Pumas, Apaches flying. But the interesting comment was from Wells Online. At 3:39 in the morning, they're still working on a story about this, and they will post the link as soon as they have it. If there's an exercise, there must be a press briefing. They didn't know. Further comments. I'm assuming this was your chopper that kept me up for hours on end. What's going on? Nightmare. There was an explosion at 3ish. At one point there were 3 helicopters. Is there something going on over Llantrisant at 4 a.m? 3 helicopters circling for hours, keeping us all awake. And this went on. There were hundreds of comments. So I decided I go to Llantrisant Common. I wanted to find the impact crater. And Stephen, one of my other friends, had come over. We went down to the field to begin with. It was snowing in the field where the pyramid came in, not in the surrounding fields, just in that one field. We then went to Llantrisant Common, and all of the metal that had been on the common for years had been neatly stacked up along the roadside. There had clearly been a meticulous metal search on the common, what the military call silent hours. Stephen and I, he was driving around, I asked him to pull the car over. I saw 2 people walking their dogs. And bearing in mind this is the morning after the night before, had they seen or heard anything? And they told me about the Chinooks that landed on Llantrisant Common. They told me about the helicopters and the troops on the ground, and how the first explosion was an air explosion, and the second one sounded like something hit the ground in Smilock Woods. Well, the Daily Mirror also posted, written by the same journalists, terrified neighbours in the country village awake during the night to sounds of explosions and fighter jets. Villagers were terrified when they awoke to sounds of explosions in the sky, not on the ground, in the sky. Remember that. I asked Gary to write to the Ministry of Defence. Why was a meticulous metal search carried out in the early hours of February 2016 on Llantrisant Common? What were they searching for? Ministry of Defence said this information is withheld under Section 26. Suddenly, bits of old bike, bits of old washing machine are now national security. Well, I didn't know where Smilock Woods was located when these witnesses told me on Llantrisant Common. And I felt very stupid when they pointed to this enormous wooded hill, 800-acre wooded hill, that rises behind the Royal Glamorgan Hospital. And I decided there and then, I wanted to go to Smilock Woods. I wanted to find the impact crater. Now Stephen and I, this is on the 26th still, and because I knew the trajectory of the green object, it wasn't long before we found the debris trail. And when you look at Smilock Woods from the common side, it looks like a giant W. The right-hand valley is lower than the left. And if, as I believe, that green object was under intelligent control and it was shot at over Llantrisant Common and losing altitude, you want to make that right-hand valley to clear that mountain. Unfortunately, on the other side, there's another hill that rises, and this is where the cross-site was. We fought our way through the woodland. I was exhausted. I needed a drink. I said to Stephen, let's go back and tell the others what we found. And we hatched a plan to go up the very next morning to find the impact site. And this is what we did. We took cameras with us. We followed the debris trail through to its end. 60-foot trees have been snapped in half. Healthy trees, an impossibility in nature. An impossibility. We followed the debris trail through to its end, and instead of finding a huge impact crater on the ground, we found this area, which is at the end of the debris trail. These trees snapped in half, all at the same height. There were burn marks on all the surrounding trees and scrape marks. It takes an awful lot of energy to snap a tree.
Like phosphorus, isn't it? That's what something to burn that tree up there. I don't know if we can get started with that. That would be good.
You can just about make out the burn marks on the trees and a very pungent smell of phosphorus, some kind of like fireworks in the air. All of the canopies of all of the trees were out. They have been snapped off, not cut. And I've tried to enhance this bottom picture here because this is a living tree with a 2-foot by 1-foot wound on it, and the living wood has curled outwards towards you. I don't know if you've ever run a blade along a ribbon, how it curls out. This is living wood. Something very big and very heavy was dragged upwards against that tree. Now, one other strange thing that happened on the morning of the 27th was my hair had turned completely white. Now, I've been told that this is an impossibility. But it wasn't. My hair had turned completely white. These pictures are from the crash site video. Now, I am a little bit salt and pepper now. This was 6 years ago. Okay. The Forestry Commission felled the debris trail. This is where it gets interesting. All of the trees that were damaged by whatever went into the woods that night were felled by the Forestry Commission. So we asked Gary to ask National Resources for Wales why they felled these trees. And they told us that these trees were infected with larch disease or Phytophthora ramorum, and that's why these trees were felled. But to the layman, that would be a perfect excuse. But because I knew the truth, I knew that there must be something else. So we looked into it further. And I didn't ask National Resources for Wales, who told us they had a plant health notice issued on these trees. I found their management strategy meetings. It's a bit like asking the Bank of England for a £10 note because they're the people, you know. So, and this is from 2010 to 2018. And these are all the plant health notices issued for Wales for that period of time. As you can see on the other map here, we have the A4119. That road is shown in its entirety. Just above, you can see the location of the Royal Glamorgan Hospital and Smilog Woods. And there has never been a plant health notice issued on Smilog Woods for larch disease. So, we looked a little deeper. On the left is a map showing the brown areas are the areas outlined for felling. The map on the right, the area circled, is the area they felled, was never outlined for felling. And the yellow dotted line that you can see is the debris trail and the impact site. Now, one of the things they're supposed to do for larch disease is what we call a sanitised felling. They must perform a sanitised felling. They must wear protective covers on their feet and on their bodies They must wash all the equipment. Every precaution must be taken so as not to spread this pathogen off-site. They must leave the land free and fallow for a minimum period of 3 years. Well, there was a place in Birmingham called Lickey Hills, and they really did have larch disease. And every branch, every trunk was taken away. And they also issued warning signs. We would ask visitors to help us in our efforts to stop this disease from spreading by observing any closures, cleaning your shoes, wheels, and dog's paws, so as not to spread this pathogen. But in Smilog Woods, there were no warning signs. Does that look like a sanitised felling to you? And they replanted the area. I highlighted some of the new saplings they planted with white lines so you can see them in these hills of clay-coloured earth. There's a new tree. Well, shortly after the event, we had a very strange bunch of people coming camp in the fields of PENTYRCH. And they'd given different stories as to who they were. They were a fracking survey team, or they were Vodafone doing field research. Which piqued my curiosity, so I went out and took a few photographs of them to ask them who they were. Stephen was with me, and when we approached the gate, we saw 2 soldiers coming towards us carrying guns, automatic weapons that did not have yellow caps in the end. They told us they were doing a military exercise in case of an emergency situation. I asked them, do you need guns for that? They said, yes, we do. Well, why are you hiding them? Because they were trying to wrap them up in their jackets. So we rounded the corner where this campsite was. And I said before, you take the man out of the army, but you can't take the army out of the man. You could not get your foot between the drawstrings of these tents. Everything was regimented and in perfectly straight lines. Initially, I started to walk around the outside of the field. I had my little dog with me, and I said to Stephen, I want to get closer. We cut across the field, and we were charged at by a huge dog that came out of one of these tents. And I could see 2 men in the furthest tent away that I now know to be the commanding officer's tent, and shouted at them, country boys are you? Put your dog on a lead, this is lambing season. Farmer's got a shotgun, he's not afraid to use it. So I had an answer, what? That was my in, and I walked up the middle of their camp and took these photographs. Without these photographs, there'd be absolutely no proof these people were ever there. I asked Gary, because I wanted to cut off any avenues they had for escape to make up lies. To ask the Cardiff government what applications were granted for anyone to use the land in the PENTYRCH fields from the beginning of the 1st of January 2015 to the end of December 31st, 2016, so we gave them a full 2 years for any planning application for any change of use of that land, which would include said campsite. And there were no planning applications for the change of use of that land. There were no applications for surveys on that land. The only people who could have done this were the military, but we needed to prove it. So we asked the Ministry of Defence. Local residents were told they were conducting a military exercise in case of an emergency situation. Why were the residents not told the military were conducting an exercise there? Well, the Ministry of Defence holds no records within the scope of our request. Really? So we asked them again. Why did you send a clean-up crew after the event? What were they searching for? And why were they carrying guns? MOD's response to your earlier Freedom of Information request is enclosed. As stated, the Ministry of Defence's response on the 24th of October 2018, no information is held in the scope of your request. A further search is being conducted, and I can confirm the Ministry of Defence holds no information. Really? So we asked them again. If this was just an exercise, why use the fields of PENTYRCH when Sennybridge is just up the road and is MOD land? And why were the residents not notified this was happening in advance? And now they changed their story. Some of the information is held within the scope of your request. This information is withheld under Section 26. Well, it's either they have no information, which they double-checked and said they had no information, or it's Section 26. So we wanted to find out. We needed it in black and white. Who were these people? Only the military can hide behind Section 26. Why were the soldiers carrying automatic weapons that did not have yellow caps in the end of the barrel, implying they were carrying live rounds? Why would these people have to be armed? Information is withheld under Section 26. Really? Men wearing forensic white paper suits were seen searching the field, so if there was a risk of contamination to the team, was there not also a risk to local residents? MOD holds no record of contamination associated with this training exercise. No exercise has ever been listed for these people to this date. And why were the military in the fields of PENTYRCH during this time? Information is withheld under Section 26. The military, not Vodafone, not a fracking survey team, the military, who were armed. Well, we did ask on 2 Freedom of Information requests, why did they lie about their identity? It's their duty to tell me. And initially, they skirted over the information, thinking that we wouldn't notice. So we resubmitted it. A new search for the information is now being completed within the Ministry of Defence, and I can confirm that some of the information in the scope is held. However, all of the information falls entirely within Section 26. Well, according to their rules and regulations, training over private land, Section 26B, identification. All members of the services must disclose their identity and that of their unit if asked to do so by landowners or officials of National Parks or Forestry Commission. It may not always be possible for landowners and officials to be readily recognised, but any persons questioning service and personnel on private land must be assumed to have a valid reason for doing so. Therefore, the utmost courtesy must be extended to them. Parties to service personnel or individuals are not to avoid any person attempting to question them. But they did, and they lied. This I've added because it took us over 3 years to get an answer for this. And this is simply about the aircraft that were circling PENTYRCH in the days preceding the event. And I've cut this short because there were multiple requests by Gary, bless him. Nearly 2 years and 6 months I've not seen or been notified of any reply. We simply asked why they were there, why no NOTAM or notice to airmen was ever issued for these aircraft to this date. MOD holds no information within the scope of your request. Really? So we asked them again. And 2 years, nearly 3 years later, we eventually get an acknowledgement. Could you please tell me why your plane, ZZ418 Hawker Beechcraft, was spotted by witnesses flying in circles and figure-8 formations in PENTYRCH, South Wales, from the 22nd of February 2016 to the 26th of February 2016. This plane was also identified on public internet flight radar websites. Information is withheld. Guess what? Under Section 26. No time has ever been issued, no exercise. This document, by the Defence Infrastructure Organisation, the people in charge. And what we will do today is prove this could never have been an exercise. The application process, they have to do a detailed recce, which is of the entire area. That includes maps and routes, an environmental survey, risk assessments. Are their soldiers going to get injured on that bit of metal over there? You know, all of this has to be done and planned months in advance. Months in advance. The brigade, the DIO in Brecon, can authorise training as soon as the owner's written consent is received. Okay. Well, we asked National Resources for Wales, who own the land, and Smilog Woods. Why was Smilog Woods closed to the public during the time February 25th and 26th of February 2016? What exactly is the reason for the military being in Smilog Woods during this time? Whose authority was it to close the woods to the public during this time? And why were the roads closed down in the areas of Llantrisant and Smilog Woods during this time? And they answered us. There was no permission granted to the military to close the woodland and the public paths and let off explosives in the woodlands mentioned during these dates, or in fact, any dates. So we have no records. This type of activity would have required permission. Therefore, Regulation 12.4a, Environmental Information Regulations 2004 applies. No information is held. So they did not get permission from the landowner. So we also asked Rhondda Cynon Taf Local Authority, because they too owned some of the land in the area. We wanted to know what they knew, or if they were told. Did the council have prior warning that the exercise was taking place, and if so, how much notification was given? We refer to your Freedom of Information request in respect of the incidents on the night of the 25th and 26th of February 2016, which involved the supposed military exercise which took place in the area around Llantrisant Common to PENTYRCH, an area within which the Royal Glamorgan Hospital and the Royal Mint are located. The authority was not made aware of any exercises in that area on these dates, and is not aware of any council property being damaged. So they weren't told either. Now, according to their regulations under Training Over Private Land Section 15, these are their own rules and regulations. The times of the exercise, including any night activities, must be a ministerial briefing, number of troops, vehicles, helicopters, outside vehicles, for example, any intensive out-of-hours helicopters or fast jets activity, any foreign forces involved. The Americans were involved. Details of any open days or media briefings. There wasn't a media briefing. And how an exercise might affect the general public. The public weren't told. Hundreds of people called the police. And we know that Wales Online weren't told, because they were still working on a story of it at 3:39 in the morning. Also, the rules and regulations for training over private land, Section 2B, C and D. Training over private land is military training carried out on land by virtue of written permission from the private landowner. Well, we know they didn't have permission. Without it, no exercise could ever take place. It includes common land subject to open access rights in England and Wales. The use of privately owned land by the military personnel is not an entitlement. Not an entitlement. And the continued use for training on is dependent on maintaining good relations with both landowners and local communities. Perhaps they'd like to tell the residents of Llantrisant why they were low-flying over their houses in helicopters at 4:30 in the morning. Those wishing to carry out any training over private land are not allowed to do so without the approval of the Defence Training Estates, which is the DIO, and written agreement from the owners and occupiers. But they didn't have permission. They broke all the rules, not just some. Disruptive activities involving helicopters or deployment of large groups of personnel and vehicles by day or night require a greater degree of planning and notification. It just gets better. Units must pay particular attention to the prevention of noise, especially during silent hours. There was no, when they hovered their helicopters over people's homes. And similarly, exercises are not to be planned in areas where disturbance would be caused to local inhabitants in their homes. Really. Service personnel on foot are entitled to use the public facilities the same as civilians, but must not monopolise the area. They closed all the footpaths and all the roads. And apparently, if a public right-of-way crosses an area of private land for training over private land, it must remain open to the public. There is no legal mechanism to close a public right-of-way for an exercise. If you want to go up and smell the roses and sit down and have a picnic in the middle of one of their exercises, you're entitled to do so. We asked South Wales Police. A number of roads were closed off during the exercise around the Royal Glamorgan Hospital in Smilock Woods. Who exactly gave the order? Why was it necessary to close the roads? And whose job was it to close the roads during these times stated? And their response was a refusal under Section 14, vexatious, worrisome to people. We're asking about road closures from 6 years ago. And we're being told that's worrisome to people. Now, I've cut out a lot of the stuff that's in between because there were multiple requests for them to answer this. And eventually we asked for an internal review. And they did answer us. This is South Wales Police, and it's laughable. In response to the road closures, we have been unable to locate any recorded information in relation to any road closures on the date specified. The officers involved have since left the organisation and other inquiries have been unsuccessful. Really? How do they know who was involved? If they can find no information, how do they know which officers were involved? What, the police don't have computers, pocketbooks, statements? No recorded information, really. Okay. Going back to the use of pyrotechnics, simulated munitions by the Ministry of Defence, special attention is to be paid to any restrictions imposed by the landowner for the use of blank ammunition or pyrotechnics or training materials. When permission has been given, which they didn't have, for the use of live ammunition or pyrotechnics, that the police have to be told, and on no account should red flares be used for any training purpose. They're not allowed to use flares, and a lot of the debunkers have said, that's what I saw, flares. I think I know the difference between a pyramid and a string of lights. So we asked the Ministry of Defence told us, what was the cause of the two explosions? They were controlled detonations of simulated munitions to assist the exercise. I'd really like to see them place one in the air. And they didn't have permission to use simulated munitions. But the explosion registered on the Richter scale 40 miles away in Monmouthshire. It shook patients awake in their beds in the hospital and shook people's homes. Such was the size of this explosion. It was not a simulated munition. So, decided to ask the Ministry of Defence, what person, organisation or public body did you receive written permission from to conduct this exercise over private land? MOD holds no information because they never had permission. What information was given to a local community or local government? You've already spoken to local government for such a loud and disturbing exercise over a congested area. MOD holds no information. Really? Were any restrictions placed upon you by the landowner organisation or public body prior to this exercise? They hold no information. What written permission did you receive to land your helicopters in silent hours in a congested area? The MOD holds no information. And can you supply a copy of a detailed recce, including a photocopy of the map and routes? And again, the Ministry of Defence have no information. A multi-billion pound operation, £3.8 billion worth of equipment was in the air, or $4.5 billion worth of equipment, and the Ministry of Defence don't have a single piece of paperwork to back this up. Not one. And that's the Ministry of Defence. So we asked South Wales Fire Service, did they know anything? Surely they must have been told something, explosives were going off. Following an investigation by the service holds no information. They weren't told. We asked the hospital. Bearing in mind they do neurosurgery there. The hospital shook. The corridors filled with smoke. No emergency measures or services or procedures were undertaken, as no information was passed to the Royal Glamorgan Hospital about this exercise. God forbid anybody was having surgery that night. We asked the Royal Mint because it had been suggested that this exercise was to do with the Royal Mint. And whilst they say they had prior notification of the training exercise you refer to from the Welsh Extremism Counter-Terrorism Unit, a privately owned company paid for with taxpayers' money that can never be subjected to a Freedom of Information request, so we pressed them further to show us proof that they had prior notification, and they told us, we have no paperwork, no documented evidence for this notification of this event. Really? This is the Royal Mint. We were informed verbally. You've got a £3.8 billion military operation going on, and they phoned you. Really? Okay. Well, the biggest thing for me was the Ministry of Defence's own avoidance policy. And this policy is so serious that it involves royal households. In practice, military low flying is not conducted in certain areas. In particular, our aircraft do not conduct low flying within controlled airspace surrounding civil airports. Well, Cardiff International's just up the road. But it gets better. They're also to avoid overflying centres of population with more than 10,000 inhabitants. There are over 13,000 inhabitants of Llantrisant alone, not including Bayeux or Pontyclun or any of the other places they overflew that night. But it gets better again. In addition, these are restrictions placed on the overflight of specific industrial. The Royal Mint sits on an industrial estate. Medical. Royal Glam's not a medical, is it? And other key establishments. Those key establishments are royal households. That's how serious this avoidance policy is, which they ignored that night. Now we do have additional witness testimony. I'm not the only witness, but I am the only one that's spoken out publicly. It's not so much the length of their testimony as much as what they saw that night that's important. We have, one person from Betws in Bridgend that witnessed military jets and helicopters pursuing a cluster of lights in the sky. I've spoken to this witness, and he told me the cluster of lights were green in colour. It gets better. And this is recently on the Sky programme that Gary and I did on UFO conspiracies with Craig Charles. I do remember a massive explosion that shook our bungalow and a huge red flash across the sky. I remember talking to you about it. You saw the woods behind you light up. Yes, it's not something you forget. We back onto the woods. Never did find out what it was. This person witnessed the object go into Smilock Woods, and all the woods light up that night. They live in Pontyclun. I had a new primary witness come forward from PENTYRCH. On Friday the 26th of February 2016, I was woken up in the middle of the night by a loud aircraft noise and very bright lights. I looked out of the bedroom window over towards the fields behind the primary school in Tinnycoid Woods. I was concerned as the lights were so bright and the noise so loud I thought an aircraft was crashing in the fields due to the low height. I continued to watch from the window at the bright lights combination of very bright white lights and red lights, trying to work out what was happening when literally the lights went and the aircraft went. I couldn't decide whether it had gone to the ground or flew off. It happened quickly where I was, and I looked and looked as if one went to the ground. I couldn't make out the amount of aircraft as the lights were blinding, but there were a few by the different engine noises. I stayed still, watching and waiting for signs of the crash to decide whether to go out and help. I could not see any smoke or signs of a crash. It was bizarre, as we had very little sleep in our house, but our children didn't wake, and this is something Anne slept all night. It was the only night since 2007 that I have not had a child awake. This is something that still stands out as being very odd to this day for us, as it's still the only night our children did not wake. This is when I was standing on the gate, and she too says, the aircraft went and the lights went. Her name has been redacted to protect her identity. And then we have the Colwinston witness, who came forward to Swansea UFO Network, who were the first UFO group to initially contact me. A family living in Colwinston, a village in a rural setting southeast of Bridgend, was awoken just after 2 a.m. when the house vibrating. The house felt like it was shaking, and the noise, never heard it in my life, very strange noise, almost felt like it was static feeling. The dog was barking and was described by the witness as bonkers behaviour, which was not characteristic. Through the window, the witness saw a large object fly over the house, roughly west to east, just over the rooftop. The object displayed a row of orange and red lights, and its underneath surface had a light green hue. A green light glow was seen leaving the main group of lights, and this descended into the fields in an area southeast of Colwinston. During this time, the witness managed to take several photographs on his mobile phone, which we have. About 6 to 7 minutes later, several aircraft were heard flying overhead, bright lights were seen, and what were thought to be Apache helicopters were heard flying around, which were dark and did not display any navigation lights at 2:33 a.m. These were heard circling the area where the green light had gone down for 5 to 6 minutes. These aircraft then headed off towards northeast, roughly in the direction of Llantress and PENTYRCH area. Then all went quiet and the witnesses went back to bed. Following the incident, the official explanation that this had been a military exercise persuaded the witnesses that this had been the case. But recently, on learning of the incident at PENTYRCH, the witnesses checked the dates and times of their photos and realised the incident that they experienced was on the same night and therefore must be linked in some way. They then contacted Swansea UFO Network. These are the photographs taken by the Colwinston witness in the early hours of the 26th of February 2016 at 2:33 a.m. These are the barrels or the orbs that were jettisoned from the pyramid. I don't know to this day what happened to the pyramid, but I do have an idea what happened to these orbs. And they were pursued and shot down by the military next to a hospital over a residential area. Now, I want to say something to the Colwinston witness. I've been accused by Swansea UFO Network of releasing these photographs without permission, something that I would never do. I've been placed in a position where I have to defend myself, and I've been asked to do so, so I am going to. Bear with me. I would personally like to address Martin, the alias given to the Colwinston witness. I would like to put your mind at rest that the longitude and latitude shown on your photographs of the UFOs objects taken that night do not show your location, only the location of the village of Colwinston. When you submitted the photographs to Swansea UFO Network, it was their responsibility to check the content before giving me permission to release them. I would like to offer my sincerest apologies to you My frustrations with this so-called UFO group boiled over when they refused to pass copies of the original photographs to the Welsh MP after Gary and I had a meeting with them, effectively preventing us from going to Welsh Government and exposing this case. They implied it was your fault, and they did not have the original photographs, when in fact they had them all along, and still do. I beseech you to release the video taken that night, not for me, not even for this case, for the furtherment of disclosure in this country and across the world, because you know this case was real. The other witnesses know this case was real. And the so-called UFO group know this case was real. And we need the ammunition to take this case forward to the UK government, to demand answers for every human being on this planet, and to get disclosure we so greatly deserve on this subject once and for all. I hope you still have my number. But if you prefer, you can contact us through the PENTYRCH website, so that we can talk in confidence to set aside any doubts or differences in order to take this forward for all our sakes. This case is not, nor has it ever been, about me. This case is about all of you and all of our children. For me, this burden will never go away. It has consumed my life. It never rests. It never stops. When I try to ignore it, it haunts me. And it will continue to haunt me until the whole truth is told, or until my dying day. If not for me, do it for everyone else. And this is why I walked away from Swansea UFO Network, who not only exposed me, because I wouldn't be here if they hadn't, but they've exposed all the witnesses' real names in writing and published it on the internet. The names have been redacted. We have David and Stephen and Donna, and you can clearly see these are their real names, not the aliases we gave them. Written by Emlyn Williams, the founder of Swansea UFO Network, just 2 weeks after he met us, when he knew full well we did not want to be identified. My second primary, David, wrote on Sue Fond's wall, this is for Emlyn Lloyd Williams, who was given a witness statement on the grounds that the witness's name would not be revealed, but he could not stick to a confidential agreement, and has now put the witness's name online, which is clearly a breach and will no longer be doing business with this unprofessional group. You should be ashamed, Emlyn Williams. But he also posted it on Emlyn's page. When a witness gives an account of what they have seen and says they don't want their name to be mentioned, it's very unprofessional to use their name when they've clearly been told not to. I have a statement here from the founder of Paranormal Now, Mr. Richard Oliver. Sufon, on Swansea UFO Network, purposely revealed the names and identities of witnesses. I, Richard Oliver, am writing this statement on behalf of Caz Clarke, as I have witnessed on numerous occasions gross misconduct being carried out by the group known as Swansea UFO Network. I have personally witnessed Emlyn Williams disclose the identity of a witness who wished to remain anonymous, which was not, under any circumstances, an accident. As he approached myself, my partner, my friends, and other YouTubers and said, you know Caz and Dave? I call them Chaz and Dave, but that's not their real name. His real name is, and that too has been redacted by me. Then reported to Caz the following day what I witnessed. I also witnessed Caz being sent the Colwinston photographs from Sufon for Caz to use as evidence. I won't read it all, but I will continue. As I am a paranormal investigator with over 20 years experience in this field, yes, I've become good friends with Caz, even best friends. Put that aside, it is my professional opinion, having seen Caz and what she has gone through regarding the PENTYRCH incident, to make it public, you can only imagine how traumatic and difficult it is. Personally, witnessing the backlash and onslaught of abuse and false allegations that Caz has been experienced from Sufon has made this journey incredibly more difficult and traumatic for Caz, and I personally thank Richard Oliver for this statement that he made of his own volition. In Swansea's blog, on the 1st of June 2021, this is after Emlyn Williams and Mike Maunder from Swansea UFO Network met the Colwinston witness the first time, and after they'd spoken to this witness, they then came to PENTYRCH to meet myself and David, along with the Colwinston witness. And they secretly recorded us without our knowledge or consent. That is the Colwinston witness, who wishes to remain anonymous.
Have you deleted it?
That's me.
Have you still got the same phone? No. Have you still got that phone?
And they posted this on the internet, which I'm sure is illegal.
With times on.
Are you fucking shitting?
Excuse the profanities. But I just learned about the photographs.
There's nothing on it. I just went on Google.
I love you.
Okay, that's enough of that. So they have no moral compass either. But this is the big one. They accused me of releasing these photographs without permission. That I so-called got the photographs via Bluetooth from the witness. They were actually sent to me via WhatsApp by Emlyn Williams, the founder of Swansea UFO Network, who accused me of releasing these photographs without permission, and I have permission. I still have the phone, if anybody would like to see it today. He gave me permission to release the photographs. There's no mention of the longitude or latitude, or that we were going to release these photographs together. Martin has given permission to publish the photographs. You've seen the photographs. They are the photographs. But thank you. Amazing. Now I'm going to pass you over to Gari Jones, who's going to show you the evidence. I've only shown you a part of it, just a little bit of what happened that night. But I will come back afterwards, because I have some summing up to do. So put your hands together, please, for Mr. Gari Jones.
Just to let everyone know, Daniel's going to give us a 10-minute break to sort out the seating, and just if anyone wants a fag or a toilet or a cup of tea or something, come back in 10 minutes and I will get into it, okay?